You're looking at a pharmaceutical manufacturing line moving at full speed. When a simple date is stamped onto a label, misinterpreting what that date actually means is the fastest way to trigger a severe good manufacturing practice violation. If you assume a drum of raw material is permanently expired when it isn't, you end up throwing away millions of dollars of perfectly viable bulk substance. But if you make the opposite error, assuming a finished pill's expiration date can somehow be extended, you risk releasing degraded, potentially dangerous medication directly to the public. That leaves quality assurance teams facing a constant dilemma. How do you definitively know when a chronological deadline on a label means test it again, and when it absolutely means throw it away? Looking at this industry standard infographic, we can see the answer comes down to two distinct deadlines governing the supply chain. Right at the top, it establishes the core rule: retest date does not equal expiry date. As the subtitle lays out, these two dates operate under entirely different sets of rules. One date governs raw materials during production, while the other governs the medication sitting in the patient's medicine cabinet. You are constantly balancing operational flexibility and resource conservation on one side against rigid, guaranteed patient safety on the other. Knowing the precise boundary between these two dates ensures you protect both a manufacturer's bottom line and the patient's health. Let's break down exactly how they differ. Let's focus on the left side of this graphic, starting with the retest date. By definition, this is the specific timeframe up to which a material must be re-examined to confirm it still meets approved specifications. Notice the graphic of the powder and vial. This date strictly governs active pharmaceutical ingredients, bulk drug substances, and manufacturing intermediates. So if you have a drum of API with a retest date of June 2026, reaching that month doesn't mean the material is dead. It means your quality control team now has an operational requirement to test the material again, specifically checking its purity, potency, and appearance. If the material passes that rigorous QC retesting, it is scientifically validated and cleared for continued use in manufacturing. Successfully extending the usability of a batch prevents the overhead of repurchasing and shipping tons of raw API, directly preserving the manufacturer's profit margin. This flexibility is a standard feature of the regulatory framework, explicitly permitted under the stability testing guidelines of ICH Q1A2. However, there is a hard limitation. This extension process is strictly confined to the manufacturing phase, well before the final drug product is actually formulated. Ultimately, the retest date acts as an operational checkpoint designed for resource conservation, rather than a final declaration of product death. Now, let's move from the manufacturing lab to the end of the supply chain, the finished dosage form that is actually ready for the patient. Moving to the right side of our reference chart, we hit the expiry date. This is the absolute final date after which a product must not be used. The reasoning is straightforward. Beyond this point, the safety, quality, and efficacy of the medication can no longer be guaranteed by the manufacturer. This designation applies exclusively to finished pharmaceutical products, things like tablets, capsules, and injections. So if a batch of finished tablets reaches a stamped expiry date of June 2026, the rules completely change. There is zero room for interpretation here. As the graphic clearly states, the product should not be used, sold, or distributed. Absolutely no retesting is allowed by quality assurance or the pharmacy. Exceptions are essentially impossible. Extending an expiry date on a finished product would require entirely new stability studies and high-level regulatory approval, which is completely unfeasible for standard commercial batches. The only required outcome upon reaching this date is the mandatory and complete disposal of the medication batch. This strict rule is enforced by baseline good manufacturing practices and consumer labeling regulations. The expiry date intentionally sacrifices operational flexibility and product yield to guarantee an absolute zero-risk safety barrier for the end user. Let's put these two dates into a direct head-to-head comparison matrix. This builds a definitive reference guide for auditing and material handling. Starting with meaning, a retest date is the time until mandatory reevaluation, whereas an expiry date is the time until mandatory non-use. For applicability, retest applies to raw APIs and intermediates. Expiry applies exclusively to packaged finished dosage forms. Looking at testing requirements, retesting is explicitly permitted to prove stability for raw materials, but strictly forbidden for finished products. This impacts shelf life extension. Extending a retest period is a standard operational possibility, but extending an expiry is strictly prohibited without new filings. Finally, the regulatory basis. One is guided by ICH Q1A data, while the other is dictated by GMP and labeling laws. The bottom section of our source chart defines the central boundary between these terms. As it states, retest date is about the suitability of APIs for manufacturing. Expiry date is about the safety and efficacy of products for patients. Internalizing this matrix means a QA analyst can look at any batch record and instantly know whether they are validating a chemical or protecting a patient. So remember the most critical baseline rule. A retest date does not equal an expiry date. For API and bulk inventory managers, your strategy is to utilize retest schedules aggressively. Safely extending material life maximizes your facility's return on investment and prevents needless waste. But for those handling finished dosage forms, your strategy is simple. Respect the expiry date as an impenetrable wall that cannot be crossed. These two opposing concepts actually work together. The flexibility of the retest process feeds into the rigidity of the expiry date, creating a closed loop of product quality and total GMP compliance. Mastering the distinct regulatory intent behind these dates elevates you from checking boxes on a clipboard to actively defending both your business and public health. To stay sharp on critical industry standards, hit the subscribe button below for more definitive good manufacturing practice and quality assurance training content. Stay rigorous, trust your testing, and make confident, compliant decisions on the manufacturing floor. See you in the next one.